Welcome to Indus Special. I'm Ejaz Haider. On Thursday morning, an Iranian surface-to-air missile shot down a U.S. Navy MQ-47 Triton, a high-altitude, long-endurance surveillance drone. The U.S. accused Iran of an act of aggression in international waters. Iran rejected the U.S. claims, saying the drone had entered Iran's airspace. Iran's Foreign Affairs Minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif, posted a Twitter message with what he claimed were precise coordinates for where the American drone was targeted. And it reads, at 0014, U.S. drone took off from UAE in stealth mode and violated Iranian airspace. He also said that here are the coordinates, and those coordinates say that this is near Kohe Mubarak. We have retrieved sections of the U.S. military drone in our territorial waters where it was shot down. The GPS coordinates released by Mr. Zarif would put the drone 8 miles off Iran's coast, so inside the 12 nautical miles from shore that Iran claims as territorial waters. When the aircraft was returning towards the western parts of the region near the Strait of Hormuz, despite repeated radio warnings, it entered into the Iranian airspace, where the air defense system of the Islamic Republic of Iran, acting under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, targeted the intruding aircraft, Iran's UN ambassador wrote in a letter to the Security Council. He said that Tehran does not seek war, but is determined to vigorously defend its land, sea, and air. The episode comes just days after American officials blamed Iran for recent attacks on foreign shipping tankers that also took place near the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has denied that it has attacked the tankers. The situation is getting serious, and while there are indications that neither side wants to get into a shooting war, there's potential for miscalculation. Meanwhile, Iranian officials told Reuters on Friday that Tehran had received a message from U.S. President Donald Trump through Oman overnight, warning that a U.S. attack on Iran was imminent. In his message, Trump said he was against any war with Iran and wanted to talk to Tehran about various issues. He gave a short period of time to get our response, but Iran's immediate response was that it is up to Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei to decide about this issue. One of the officials told Reuters on condition of anonymity. To discuss where things are headed, we are joined by James Dorsey, who's a senior fellow at the Rajaratnam School of International Studies at Singapore. We're also joined by Hamidreza Gholamzadeh, who is a journalist based in Tehran and writes on foreign policy issues. Mr. Gholamzadeh, give us a sense of, starting in reverse, give me a sense of this Reuters story about Iran getting a message from President Trump. Does it indicate that President Trump is essentially ratcheting up pressure but actually wants Iran to sit down with him at the table?
Well, I've been trying to actually confirm the message since the morning that it was published, but I haven't received any confirmation yet from any officials in Iran, and I'm not sure how true the claim is. But on the other hand, I know officially that Iran has summoned the Swiss ambassador, which is actually representing the United States in Iran, and they have, the Foreign Ministry has actually announced its opposition to the provoking from the American side to the ambassador, and he has actually promised to deliver the message to the Americans. So the channel is in place, and the Swiss ambassador and embassy is actually the official route between the two countries who don't have diplomatic ties.
Okay, so has the Swiss embassy confirmed, since you're saying that the Iranian officials haven't confirmed the message, what do the Swiss say?
No. Not regarding the Reuters news piece, no. There has been no confirmation yet from any other sides. Okay. But the point is that the route is that we have the official route. So a message being delivered by the Americans through Oman doesn't seem to be very clear, unless, and particularly the Reuters says that the message is harsh and some sort of threat in that. If there is a threat, and if the United States has actually believes that it has the right to retaliate, that would be some official message from the official route. But if there is a message from the Oman side, it shows that actually they don't have the the right to retaliate and to respond, and they are trying to convince Iran not to escalate the situation and tension. So if there is a message through Oman, I would believe that it would be something for the escalation and to say that the United States doesn't want war.
Okay, since you write on foreign policy issues, give me a sense of what you think the situation is. Is this about rhetoric? Is this about bluster? Is this about, as I said earlier, ratcheting up pressure to get Iran to the table and to renegotiate a nuclear deal? How do you look at it?
Actually, it seems that the United States was trying to test Iran's capability of response to any sort of violation and attack. And it received actually a very harsh response from the Iranian side. It was a huge damage. It was one of the most advanced assets of the United States, and it was supposed to be actually not detected by the radars, but it was not only detected but also targeted by Iranian missiles. So it seems that the effort was sort of test to check how responsive Iran would be in any similar attacks and violations, and it received the message it wanted. On the other side, the Americans seem to try to actually win the war of narratives, I can say. We are living in a post-truth era right now, and it has been intensified since President Trump in office, and that they are trying to sell their own alternative realities, as it was once mentioned in the White House, and they're trying to sell those narratives. Iran has released the coordinates of the GPS coordinates of the location. Iran just released the photos of the debris of the drone, and Iran has give all the documents needed. But the United States is just claiming that it was in international waters and in international airspace, that it was provocative from Iranian side and such things.
Yes, that's what the Americans claimed. But as I said, Mr. Zarif gave the coordinates, and if those coordinates are really the coordinates, then it's quite clear that it was shot over Iranian territorial waters. But a final question, Mr. Gholamzadeh, the attacks on the tankers. Who do you think are attacking the tankers? Because the Americans and their allies say it's Iran, and Iran says, well, we are not doing this. So who is doing it?
That was actually the next example I wanted to provide. In that case, again, the United States is accusing Iran of carrying out the attacks, and yet failing to provide any evidence for that. We have seen that Germany, Japan, and many other countries are doubtful about the claims that the United States is making. And there are also some voices from within the United States who do not believe that the White House and the American administration are truthful about the attacks being on Iran. It seems that the attacks are one of those steps by the B team, as Prime Minister Zarif calls them, Bibi Netanyahu in Israel, and Bolton in the United States, who are trying to actually erupt a war against Iran, and they are not satisfied by anything less than a war, a full-fledged war actually against Iran. So
but it doesn't seem the U.S. has much appetite for a war per se. But thank you so much, Hamidreza Gholamzadeh, for speaking with us. James Dorsey, make some sense for me of this situation.
Let me draw a broad picture for you. I agree with my colleague in Tehran that we're dealing with a lot of murkiness, and we really don't know what is fact and what is not. However, what both tanker incidents and the drowning of the drone have done is it's taken the situation to the brink. And that may have been the only way to try and break a stalemate that took with it the risk of an escalation that nobody wanted. That's one. Two, if you look at Trump's response, Oman makes perfect sense. Oman has been the mediator in the past on a number of issues between Iran and the United States. Again, if you look at yesterday's press conference remarks that Trump made to the media while Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, was there, everybody's focusing on the fact that Trump was downplaying this by saying it was a mistake. What people are not focusing on is the very last sentence that he spoke as the media were being pushed out of the room, where he said, "This will not stand." What
Absolutely, but here's the thing, James. You're right. I mean, because that press conference is also a sense that he seemed to imply that this decision to strike the drone was taken by some independent actor, although the Iranians have claimed it as, you know, the state of Iran having taken that decision. But Trump seemed to imply that. Secondly, he also said that it was fortunate that the bird was not piloted, which I guess was a reference to the fact that mercifully it wasn't a piloted aircraft, U.S. aircraft that the Iranians had targeted, which he seemed to suggest would have actually escalated the situation.
That's absolutely correct, but it doesn't actually deny or detract from what I'm trying to say. So what you got, I think, is, and if I'm right, then it was an incredibly smart move, that Trump did respond. He authorized the attack and then withdrew it, basically saying to the Iranians, look, I can do this, and I can extract enormous pain, but I didn't. I'm leaving the door open. So I think that's what's really happening. The problem with, and the advantage in all of this is that part of the problem until now has been that you've had a military standoff, you've had a war of words, and there was no diplomatic channel. The only apparent diplomatic channel was last week with the Japanese, which the Iranian supreme leader basically shot down by saying there's no point in responding to Trump.
Absolutely, but here's the thing, and I will return to you on this. As you said, there's Oman, as Mr. Gholamzadeh was saying, the Swiss are also one of the conduits. I'm also joined by Mohammad Marandi, who is an Iranian-American academic and political analyst. Mr. Marandi, thank you for being on the program. We were talking about, obviously, the escalating situation, but here's the thing. Is this because there are also indications that neither side really wants to get into a shooting war. However, the potential for miscalculation seems to be increasing. Would you agree with that?
Yes, but obviously the reason why the chances for escalation are increasing is because the United States has been escalating. Trump left the nuclear deal. He has been escalating an economic war against women and children in Iran. He is attempting to even prevent Iran from importing medicine, and as a result, people have died, cancer patients in particular, with certain medicines have run short. And he calls these, he said it's an economic war. He says these are brutal sanctions, so he's trying to brutalize the Iranian economy. He has tweeted that he can destroy Iran. He has repeatedly threatened the country, and so have people in his administration. And of course, U.S. forces have surrounded the country with roughly 50 military bases. And this particular drone was not the first drone to intrude in Iranian airspace. We've had a number of U.S. drones that were downed. The United States never denied this. And the Iranians have their remains. And one drone was successfully brought down after it was hacked by the Iranian military, and it was successfully landed, as you may recall. Yes. So this was another act of aggression by the Americans, and this is a part of that maximum pressure campaign that the Americans are imposing. The Iranians, of course, have no option but to defend their sovereignty, to defend their territory, especially in the face of
I hear you, Mr. Marandi, but let's try and get the broader picture. There are lots of these tactical moves on both sides, of course, But what is your sense of the strategic picture here? And I ask this question because, A, Trump has, with reference to Syria and also with reference to Afghanistan, has basically constantly been saying that I want to get out of these wars. So therefore, for him to try and pick up another war would be stupid. So that is one aspect. The other thing is that he was, even when he wasn't the president, he was opposed to the JCPOA, which maybe because of Obama legacy or whatever, that's besides the point. But do you think that what he's trying to do is to put pressure on Iran in order to get Iran to the table and to renegotiate? Is that the broader strategic picture?
Yes, he wants Iran to renegotiate, but that is the whole problem. The Iranians, after 10 years of negotiations, they've reached a deal with the United States and the other members at the negotiating table. And this is not something that the Iranians will accept. The United States has signed a commitment. In 2016, when Trump was brought to power, there was no revolution in the United States where the previous regime was no longer accepted and their commitments no longer were valid. That's not how things work. And the Iranians know that if they accept U.S. and if they appease the United States and accept new conditions, that will only be a signal for the United States to continue using pressure to gain more concessions from the country. Every time the Iranians and the Americans sit at the negotiating table, then Trump could just send out a tweet saying, I'm not happy with the talks. That's
a very important point, Mr. Marandi. Stay with me. Let me put this before James Dorsey. James, what Mr. Marandi is saying is that, yes, Trump is trying to put pressure on Iran, but if you begin to game it, it's quite obvious that what really is the core here for Iran, there's a lot of quid, and that quid keeps multiplying, and so it's going to become endless. And so if you game it that way, Iran doesn't have much incentive to get back to the table.
I think part of the problem here is that Trump miscalculated. There are indications that he believed that maximum pressure would fairly quickly force Iran back to the negotiating table. We're now more than a year since he withdrew from the nuclear agreement and started imposing sanctions, and Iran is nowhere close to returning to the negotiating table. So Trump has a dilemma. He needs to show success. He's just launched his re-election campaign. He does not want another war, or certainly not before the election campaign. And so somehow he's got to get beyond this stalemate. And I think that the strategy is brinkmanship.
Brinkmanship, but there's without the possibility of healing over, I believe.
I think the point is, and that's where I see a silver lining in what we've seen happening over the last 24 hours, that there now is a diplomatic channel. At least Trump has opened that diplomatic channel. The Iranians have responded to that to say that is a decision of the supreme leader. And that's really going to be the crucial issue, how the supreme leader is going to respond. If it's in a yardstick, his response to the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe last week is not a good omen.
So James, tell me, how is this going to play out? I mean, if we have decided that Iran is calculating that getting back to the table and renegotiating is not in Iran's interest, if Trump doesn't want to get into a war, then what kind of victory sign he's going to make in order to get out of this?
Look, I think, first of all, as a matter of principle, the Iranians saying we have an agreement and we signed the agreement, we negotiated that for years, the United States walked away from it. Why should we trust a further negotiation? Is correct. The problem with that is it doesn't get you anywhere, and it doesn't resolve what could become a far greater cause. I think there are all kinds of steps that the two sides could take to try and dial down the tension without being seen to back off. So, for example, the Americans could start redirecting the flight paths of their drones. There are steps that the Iranians could take in terms of releasing foreigners who are in Iranian prisons, which would be seen as goodwill gestures. So there are all these little steps that really don't cost a lot.
That's an interesting point, James. Thank you so much for your inputs. Let me just go back to Mr. Marandi. Mr. Marandi, I want to ask you this. There's, of course, the unilateral withdrawal by the US from JCPOA, but the Europeans are still there. The Europeans are saying to Iran that you have to abide by your commitments. But Tehran has obviously threatened to curb its compliance with the JCPOA's enriched uranium and heavy water limits as of July 7, unless the INSTEX framework actually works and relieves the sanctions pain from Iran. How do you think, I mean, if Iran does start not abiding by some of the provisions of the JCPOA, it could be antagonizing the Europeans that are still part of the deal?
Well, the Europeans are not a part of the deal in reality. They are in complete violation. They are obeying Trump. They are not carrying out a single commitment. The Iranian side is the only side that is abiding by its side of the bargain. So this is a one-sided deal as we speak. So Iran has really no option but to limit its commitments in order to put pressure on the Europeans and the Americans. I think that's clear. But another thing that I'd like to point out is that it is not the Iranians who've left the negotiating table. It is the Americans who've left the negotiating table. They're the ones who quit the JCPOA. The Trump Secretary of State was actually sitting at the negotiating table, and then Trump decided to leave. So it's not for Iran to change its position, it's the United States. Iran has not done anything different in the last couple of years. It's the United States that's changed its policy. It's the United States that's created this escalation. And for the US president to send a message to Iran and saying, talk to us or I'll kill your people or I'll bomb your people, that's like a hostage taker. Iran cannot respond to that sort of language. Iran obviously is not going to change its position under the threat of bombings. What Iran can do is to make sure the United States recognizes that if it launches an attack, even a limited attack on Iran, the response will be very robust. It will be disproportionate. It will be much larger than any initial strike. And those countries that are helping the United States will be punished alongside the Americans. So if I were in the United Arab Emirates, for example, I'd be thinking about leaving the country. So the only way forward really is for the United States to come to its senses, to start behaving like a normal country, to abide by its commitments. Iran hasn't done anything new. Iran continues as we speak to abide by its commitment.
I completely agree with you. But here's the thing. One, as you know, since you look at these things very closely, international order at the end of the day, despite all the rules and everything, is about power projection. The Iranians obviously are looking at the JCPOA within the framework of the nuclear deal itself. No more, no less. Whereas the Trump administration has talked about not just the nuclear side of things, but additionally in terms of Iran's alleged power projection in the greater Middle East. So it's about, not just about, as far as the Americans are concerned, it's also about Iran's general behavior in the greater Middle East, which the Americans think are opposed to its own interests as also the interests of its allies. So that is where the discrepancy or the differential lies. And when you say that Iran's response will be disproportionate, and that's a very interesting statement to make, given the power asymmetry between the US and Iran, the U.S. response could then also be devastating.
Well, you mentioned 2 points. First of all, I think it's quite clear, as you pointed out, that Iran hasn't left the agreement, and Iran is the side that is abiding by the agreement. If the United States wants to talk about other issues, the first thing that it has to do is to show that it has credibility and reliability, and that is to abide by its current commitments. How can Iran negotiate with Americans over any issue when the issue that they've negotiated over for 10 years and they signed an agreement is not being taken care of in accordance with the agreements by the United States?
Correct.
So the United States has disregarded its current commitments and say, let's negotiate and have commitments over other issues. How can we ever do such a thing when the current commitments of the United States are not being abided
Absolutely.
by?
I completely agree with you. I totally agree with you.
Is that, yes, you're right. The United States is a powerful country. It is much more powerful than Iran. But there is a very interesting point here. And that is, first of all, Iran is located alongside the Persian Gulf. And therefore, most of the important strategic oil and gas assets in the world lie in the Persian Gulf. And the Americans have to be very careful about not destroying the global economy through conflict.
Absolutely. That's also a very important point. This is all the time I have for this. Thank you so much. Mohammad Marandi was giving us a sense of what Iran can possibly do in response to an American miscalculation if the U.S. decides to get into a shooting war. We'll take a short break and return to discuss India-Pakistan relations in the wake of exchange of letters between Pakistani and Indian leadership. Stay with us. Welcome back to Indus Special. There was some optimism in the Pakistani media following response letters from Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and India's Foreign Minister. This prompted the Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson to issue the following statement. Responding to questions regarding media reports concerning Indian response to the congratulatory letters by the Prime Minister and Foreign Minister to Prime Minister Narendra Modi and External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar on assumption of their respective offices, the spokesperson cautioned against media speculation and underlined that it was an established diplomatic practice for the leadership to congratulate new office holders and for them to respond. Pakistan's position on the way forward in Pakistan-India relations was clear and well-known and did not require a repetition. The spokesperson added that the vision of peace, progress and prosperity in South Asia could be advanced by peacefully resolving all outstanding disputes, including Jammu and Kashmir, and moving away from the dynamic of confrontation to cooperation. Further reports have made clear that there's no thaw, and India continues to front-load any dialogue by insisting that Pakistan has to rein in the so-called terrorist groups. To discuss this further, we have with us Muzzammil Thakur. He is the President, World Kashmir Freedom Movement, and joins us from London. We also have with us Ambassador Zameer Akram, who joins us from Islamabad. Ambassador Akram, just give me a sense of, because there was also a report in The Hindu which rejected a report in one of the Pakistani papers which seemed to suggest that India has agreed to start a dialogue. And this Indian report says India on June 20 rejected a Pakistani media report claiming New Delhi is ready for talks with Islamabad. Why do we seem so eager to suggest that India is ready for talks when India has constantly been saying that we don't really want to talk?
Well, I fail to understand why we have this penchant for making a big thing out of nothing and constantly asking for a dialogue with India, which is quite clearly not interested in a dialogue. So I think that this is something that we should stop doing. And I think the media also should stop speculating on this, because the Indians have made it very clear that they don't want to have a dialogue. And we should let it rest at that. When they are ready, they will be ready. But we shouldn't be constantly seeking a dialogue with the Indians.
Muzzammil Thakur, give me a sense of how you look at the situation here. especially, well, broadly India-Pakistan, but so in relation to occupied Kashmir and the situation there?
It's a little complex for me to understand that after 70 years of trying to negotiate, trying to bring India to the negotiating table, let's call it a round table. Every time Pakistan has given that chance to India, India have either refuted it or always maintained that it has to be done under the guise or the banner, the assumption that there needs to be terrorism needs to be addressed first. Now, where is that terrorism stemming from? They claim it's from Pakistan. The fact that Pakistan continuously approaches India to talk about Kashmir, I have simply one question. In the last 70 years, the number of times that these approaches, these attempts have been made, has there been any difference made on the ground inside Kashmir? It seems to be... Okay,
Muzzammil, let me take this question to Ambassador Akram, who has had a long, illustrious career in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Pakistan. Ambassador Akram, can you answer this question that Muzzammil is raising?
Well, I agree with him that we constantly offer dialogue to the Indians, which is a sterile dialogue, and no progress is made. Even when we have had such discussion or dialogues with the Indians, their position has remained virtually unchanged, that Kashmir is an integral part, according to them, of India, and that all that needs to be really discussed, according to them, is Azad Kashmir status. So even if we do have a dialogue, this dialogue isn't going to lead to any realistic outcomes. The only time there was some kind of movement or some kind of willingness on the Indian part to find a middle ground or find some way forward was during Mr. Vajpayee's time. But let's be very clear that they are not ready to negotiate on the status of Indian-occupied Kashmir. So I think we in Pakistan seem to believe, wrongly in my view, that a dialogue, even if it takes place, is going to lead to a result or a solution to the Kashmir problem. It's not going to be the case unless and until India comes to the realization that Kashmir is out of their control and that there is enough international pressure on them to find a way to resolve this problem.
On that note, let me try and get the report from the ground, because I'm also joined by Gowhar Geelani, who's a journalist based in Srinagar. Mr. Geelani, give me a sense of what the situation is, and has there any been let up in the state oppression that we have been witnessing over the last 3 years, in fact 5 years, but really the situation getting worse in the last 3 years?
Well, Mr. Ejaz, the situation on the ground is getting murkier. It is getting very, very ugly, in a sense that last year, 2018, was the bloodiest in about a decade. So we had, civilian killings, a record number of civilian killings, and also killings of armed rebels and also Indian security personnel. And the kind of policy that is continuing is Mr. Doval at the helm of affairs. That policy of 4 Ds, the denial and destruction and defeating the enemy, perceived enemy, and the operation all out on the security front, where anybody having an opinion is being criminalized. So the bans on the organizations like Jamaat-e-Islami and JKLF and all, student politics is banned. So there is no let-up as far as that situation is concerned since Narendra Modi's ascendancy in May 2014 and his re-election in 2019. And moreover, the extension given to Mr. Doval and they have accorded him a cabinet rank is a signal, that a message has been telegraphed that this policy unfortunately is going to continue.
This policy will continue. Thank you so much, Gowhar Geelani, for giving us a sense of what is on the ground. Back to Muzzammil Thakur. Muzzammil, what would you suggest Pakistan should do?
I think you need to reanalyze the entire strategy. They need to think of what's been happening over the last 70 years, that the negotiations, or rather the relationship between India and Pakistan, the root cause of all the problems is Kashmir. When India is never going to accept any concession on Kashmir, what exactly is Pakistan willing to concede on? I mean, it means that they are accepting that if India will not concede Kashmir, it means that Pakistan will have to concede something else instead. That's something else. The only thing that India are willing to talk about in the context of Kashmir is Azad Kashmir. They want that back. Now, they may not be saying that openly and publicly over the last 70 years, but as Gowhar has just said, that with Doval getting a cabinet position inside the Modi government, we're going to see a hell of a lot of changes with the Modi government. The current Pakistani government have extended felicitations to this new this re-elected Modi government. But what differences are there going to be from the last Modi government that was just, the last couple of years that he existed? Prime Minister Imran Khan was also the prime minister during the tenure of Narendra Modi. This new government that has been formed again, is there any expectation from this government that this new government of Modi is going to be any worse or any less than the previous Modi government? There has to be some kind of critical thinking or expectation. There must be some kind of understanding on the government's part that with this new Modi government, with the inclusion of Pratigya Thakur, who is an extremist, a convicted terrorist, with the UP, Yogi Adityanath, another extremist. These people that are coming into power, becoming part of the BJP, becoming members of parliament, and running this country, is there any hope from the Pakistani side that this extremist version of Hindutva, extremist version of so-called secular India, is going to reciprocate in a positive way to Pakistan? And if not just to that, at least to the human rights violations inside Kashmir. I can understand that India, or not that I will accept it, but I can understand from the Indian perspective that they're not willing to concede Kashmir. They're not willing to consider that Kashmir is an international dispute, although that Pakistan is in a very strong position considering the UN report. 3/4 of that report was talking about the human rights violations committed by Indian forces and Indian government in occupied Kashmir. So that gives Pakistan a stronger position. However, they still need to understand the dynamics of what Indian politics is in relation to the rest of the world, but also inside Kashmir. I don't see the Indian government being willing in any shape or form to negotiate anything in relation to Kashmir unless it is Azad Kashmir. And I think that's going to become a sticking point.
Yeah. So let me go back to Ambassador Akram, because Ambassador Akram also talked about Azad Kashmir. Now, here's the thing, Ambassador. Before everything else, it's about the language, it's about the narrative, it's about the taxonomy. And we have singularly failed to actually put the facts out. Azad Kashmir, and since I personally belong to Poonch, that's a history that has been like a household thing for me. We stood up against the Dogra army. We liberated Poonch. The Gilgit scouts liberated Gilgit-Baltistan. This is a part which basically is about its own people. It's called Azad Kashmir because we liberated it. Now, can we put out this narrative? Because except for, you get an Australian like Christopher Snedden to come and actually talk about these things. Why can we not talk about these things and constantly?
Well, I think I would put the blame on our past governments which have not followed the same Kashmir policy. And it has been a policy in which they have not been fully committed. They have only focused on resuming a dialogue for the sake of dialogue rather than projecting and promoting a clear-cut policy on Kashmir internationally on the grounds that you have mentioned, that it is a struggle for self-determination, which is a just struggle recognized under international law, and on the basis of principles that the Indians themselves have accepted, which have been enunciated in UN Security Resolution. Second, we have not underscored Indian state-sponsored terrorism against the Kashmiri people, perhaps because we thought that if we do that, then the Indians would not be ready to talk. The point is that in the hope of cajoling the Indians to talk to us, we have been reticent in really saying what we should be saying and projecting this in a sustained, proactive manner internationally. But as you have seen in the past, this has been a vain hope because the Indians have only taken, made use of that, they have taken advantage of that without really coming to talking about the real issues with regard to Jammu and Kashmir. So I think this policy needs to end. And what's more is that in the Modi government, which in my view is a fascist government, these people look at Pakistan's repeated requests now for dialogue as a means of appeasement and as a means of demonstrating our weakness vis-a-vis India. And that is a wrong signal that they are taking, but that is a wrong...
But let me add here, some of the analysts essentially suggest that we need to start talking about things which can be talked about, and that should then lead to some kind of improvement in the atmospherics. And when that happens,
we have been down that road. I have been part of those kind of negotiations where they have said, let's have people-to-people contacts, let's have open trade, and all those other things, and that will set the environment for dialogue on Kashmir and reserve. This has been tried and tested and has failed. Even look at we are ready to trade, but on the other side of the border, they have non-tariff barriers which undermine Pakistani exports. So, people-to-people contacts. We are trying to open this Kartarpur corridor and look at the position that the Indians have taken on that issue. So, this is a clear-cut example of the kind of doublespeak that we are hearing from Narendra Modi's government.
Okay. Muzzammil Thakur, how would you respond to the suggestion that perhaps we should begin talking about things that can be talked about, and then that could perhaps lead to, talking about other things? As Ambassador Akram said, he's been part of all that officially also, as part of Track 2 also, and he seems to suggest that that approach didn't work and it's unlikely to work. Do you agree with that?
On some level, yes. Look, if Pakistan and India talk, usually what are the talks about? Trade, terrorism, the Chinese-Pakistan economic corridor. There are certain things that are mutual for both India and Pakistan, but the one sticking point is always terrorism. Now, but the definition of that terrorism, and I know we've mentioned this before many times about narrative, that when India talks about terrorism, that they need to have that resumption of dialogue can only happen when terrorism is going to be nipped in the bud. But Pakistan needs to respond to that by saying, what is the definition of terrorism? Who is doing this terrorism? Are we going to ignore Balochistan? Are we going to ignore what the RAW is doing in other parts of Pakistan? I mean, it's very well documented. So when these issues are, we want to have negotiations, we want to have dialogue, and we want to discuss certain issues, it seems that it is going to be only for the prosperity of Pakistan and India as sovereign nations independently, irrespective of Kashmir, which is fine. If you, as a nationalist, Indian nationalist, or as a Pakistani nationalist, as global players, it's very important to have sovereign borders, very important to have strong economies, very important to have, R&D, research and development in your countries. However, if ultimately the core issue of Kashmir is not going to be solved, then this is all going to be superficial.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Muzzammil Thakur, for speaking with us. Very quickly, before I wrap up, Ambassador Akram, as Muzzammil was suggesting, let's not shy away from, if India wants to talk about terrorism, why should we shy away from talking about terrorism? Because there's so much of what they've been doing to us and they're still doing. So let's talk about it.
No, I agree. We have no problem about terrorism. Terrorism actually is a subject in the 8-point comprehensive dialogue process. And our argument is that we are ready to talk about terrorism, but India should also be ready to talk about all the other things which are part of the agenda, the 8-point agenda for the comprehensive dialogue. And yes, while the Indians can make all kinds of allegations, there are charges that we have also to make against India of promoting terrorism through the TTP and Baloch separatists and all the other things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's exactly what I was referring to. Thank you so much, Ambassador Zameer Akram. Is all that we have for today. We shall see you next week. Until then, it's goodbye.